The social media you and I know is wrong. But what can we do to fix it? If you, like myself, live your life largely on the tech side of YouTube and the internet as a whole, you've probably been hearing a lot about a little thing called the Fediverse and how it's going to fix the internet and social media as a whole. In fact, you may have heard about it as recently as last week from one of my favorite YouTubers, Marques Brownlee, and his awesome team. Now, they did a great job diving deep into the technical side of what exactly the Fediverse is and why you might be interested. So if you want that, I very much recommend that video. However, in this video, we explore the Fediverse from your perspective, the user, and try to answer the question, should you federate? So what is the Fediverse? The TLDR is that it's basically a new way of interconnecting different social media platforms, so all your posts and all the people you follow's posts get sent to you regardless of which app you're using. Now, that's the elevator pitch, and in general, that's the goal. However, in reality, it's a bit more complicated than that. But as I said, this video is about whether or not you should check it out. So let's start with why you might be interested in the first place. As many of you, I'm sure, are starting to notice, a lot of these social media platforms that we all frequent, like Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, et al., are kind of becoming shittier. Now, my channel demographics tell me that most of you are somewhere in the ballpark of 18 to 35, so I think I can reasonably assume that you probably remember the early days of the internet similarly to myself. A collection of websites where people talk to other people, and you can find conversations about everything from cute cats to nuclear war, and everything in between. In short, it was social media that facilitated people socializing with other people. Personal websites didn't have the same sheen that things like Squarespace have normalized. They were personal and flawed, but fun and unique. And when you were talking to someone online, you didn't wonder if they were a bot, you wondered if they were an old man in his basement. But at the very least, that old man was a real, live, living, breathing human. So, as you may have surmised, what I'm getting at is that the modern internet and social media isn't about interacting with other humans and socializing online. Instead, it's commerce. And don't get me wrong, there was plenty of commerce on the early internet. After all, there are only a few things that you can reliably expect to jump on whatever the new trend is when it comes to increasing your audience.
Cone.
And capitalism. So yeah, obviously, once the internet had caught on, advertisers were chomping at the bit for any new way to reach people. Pop-up and banner ads were everywhere, and online retailers were slowly tightening their death grip on the brick-and-mortar stores. However, it was taking a pretty long time to penetrate the world of social media. And that was in large part due to the fact that the purpose of social media wasn't to find your next pair of socks or a cool keyboard. It was socializing. So everything that got in the way of that was really just a distraction and an annoyance. Any selling that was taking place on these platforms was peer-to-peer. People with small businesses selling things to other interested people, or MLMs, but that's a story for another day. Once again, the appeal is that when you are being sold something, it's by another human person behind their computer screen. Contrast that to today's social media landscape, and we see a very different picture. Not only do we have full-on ads getting pushed harder than the posts of the people that we actually follow, but we aren't even really incentivized to follow people at all. We aren't meant to have meaningful interactions with other people, we're meant to have our eyes locked on the screen, so when an ad pops up, we're likely to think about buying it. Social media isn't about being social anymore, it's about creating a captive audience for advertisers to exploit. And as a consequence, we are all less attached than ever to anything that we're seeing online. However, it doesn't have to be that way. And a wonderful community of devs has been working on solving just that issue for some time now. So, now with the background out of the way, again, what is the Fediverse? You can think of the Fediverse like a cross-platform version of Discord. anyone can make an instance, or in this analogy, server, and as long as you've been granted access by the admin of that server, you're able to interact with it in any way you like. But, and this is the kicker, it doesn't matter which service you use to access it. Unlike Discord, where you can only access other Discord servers through the Discord app, with Fediverse apps and websites, you can access the content from people you follow on any instance that you're a part of. So if we apply that idea to something like Reddit, you could join what is essentially a subreddit where all you talk about is, I don't know, tacos. But instead of having to log on to one centralized service like Reddit to access all those fire taco posts, you get to log into whichever service you want. Or if you want, you can even make your own and still have access to every single delicious taco post. And that really is the driving idea behind the Fediverse. It's a decentralized, open source, and free to implement set of protocols which allow apps to give you access to all the different communities that you're a part of. And as with all open source and decentralized projects, the main advantage of this approach is privacy and transparency. Because it doesn't have one massive profits-driven tech company at its head, and is instead a collection of disparate and separate entities, a federation, all working to incentivize you to join their platform for the features and not just because they're the only kid on the block, there is much more incentive for the user experience to be one that you're actually likely to enjoy. And that means minimal, if any, ads, no algorithmically surfaced posts unless you want them, and much more personal user-generated content, if that's what you're looking for. Now, as with all things cybersecurity and privacy related, I can't sit here and tell you for absolute certain that they won't sell your data or do anything nefarious. And before you sign up for any instance, you should make sure that you trust that instance with the data that you're giving them. However, because you're free to move away to any other platform at any point, there is much less incentive for these providers to make their product shittier. It was recently discovered through an FTC case against Google that Google conducted research a few years ago, looking into whether or not there would be a meaningful negative impact on their bottom line if they made their service significantly worse. In short, they looked at whether or not people would stop using Google and their other products if they made them work way less good, i.e. covered them in ads and useless AI crap. And, unfortunately, they concluded that they could, in fact, make their offerings significantly worse, and in turn increase their profit without affecting whether or not people would actually use their services. The reason that something so seemingly preposterous is possible is, of course, because Google is a monopoly. Don't believe me? Well, the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, themselves proved it in a court of law, and while at the time of writing, it is expected that Google will appeal the ruling, given the sheer amount of evidence against them, I think it's unlikely they'll be successful, in my super professional lawyer opinion. So, bringing it back to the Fediverse, in theory, because everything is open source, you, or any tech professional, can always vet the service that you're using to see what they're doing with your data. And because there are so many contributors, there really is no incentive for any of these services to make changes or add features that benefit their pockets, but not their users. Now, this enshittification is, to a certain extent, unavoidable under capitalism. And the idea of a free market regulating itself has been proven time and time again to be utterly daft. However, a free and open market, like the Fediverse, in combination with increasingly competent government regulation, could, I think, have the potential to genuinely live up to the promises of the free market, and possibly take us back to the internet of old, with people talking to other people about things that they're interested in on platforms that work for them and not for the ad agencies and investors. Alright, so now we have an idea of what the Fediverse is about, but what are your options? What are you actually looking at if you want to join? We'll start with the most popular, Mastodon. Mastodon was one of the first services boasting federation as its key feature. They offer an alternative microblogging experience. Think Twitter, but without all the nasty Elon Musk. Mastodon is geared towards users who want short and sweet posts about whatever might be on other people's minds. Even if you don't really have much of an interest in microblogging, it's not a bad place to start. Text posts are cross-compatible with basically all other federated services at this time due to their low complexity. Things like photo, video, and audio can be a bit more janky to access when being displayed on a service that isn't geared towards those formats, so starting out with something more simple, like a text-based service, might be a good way to ease into the world of federation. If the UI of Mastodon doesn't quite jive with you personally though, or maybe you're looking at a more anime-focused discussion, then Miski and Perloma might be worth looking into as well. They offer the same base service, microblogging Twitter alternative, but with different focuses. However, if you're really not interested in all that Twitter malarkey and you just want to have your good old Instagram back, you're going to want to check out Pixelfed. With Pixelfed, you get a much more stills-focused experience. It has a familiar UI with a lot of the same features you've become used to on Instagram, but without all the mess of reels, stories, and algorithmic discovery or any of that bloat. I found the content on Pixelfed instances to be far more genuine, and as a photographer, much more engaging than all the branded, beautified content that you see on Instagram these days. Maybe you're more of a Redditor, and you want to give Steve Huffman the old F you. Well, in that case, Lemmy is going to be your service of choice. Lemmy is a link aggregator like Reddit, but unlike Reddit, they actually seem to like and respect their users. Just like with Reddit, you can find all kinds of trending posts and join more focused communities. Like I said with Mastodon, these more text-focused experiences work a bit more reliably at the moment, and interoperability seems to function better than with more complex things like video or audio sharing. Though that is absolutely an option as well. Admittedly, I don't know much about these, but they're essentially YouTube and SoundCloud alternatives. Now, I think generally with video and audio content, you're not going to get a whole lot of people spending the time and effort to make it unless they can profit from it, because it's a much higher cost investment than simply taking a picture or posting some text and having a conversation. However, you never know. That's how YouTube started, so maybe you'll find some really cool stuff on there. Now you have some options to pick from, but before you do, is it actually a good experience? Alright, here's where the usual open source spiel comes in. Ultimately, this is all still kind of a project for power users. While I personally really love the idea and am even really impressed with the execution, it's still not there yet. None of these platforms are at the point where I think normal people who aren't at least a little tech savvy would bother learning how to use them. The friction of conversion is still just too high. Now, I think some are better than others. For instance, the options like Mastodon or Lemmy, I think, have a much better chance of pulling their users away from their non-federated alternatives. Not only are those alternatives much more outwardly hostile towards their users, but the way that people interact with things like Twitter and Reddit is much more transferable. I think the biggest hurdle that these Fediverse platforms will face is going to be the fact that people don't want to leave their platforms. Things like TikTok and Instagram aren't focused on getting you to follow people or topics anymore. And to a certain extent, I think a lot of their user base has been slow-boiled into wanting that. I can see it myself even. When I joined Pixelfed, knowing full well that the entire point was that you follow specific people and see their posts, I found myself kind of bored and wondering where all the posts were. I found that I had gotten really used to just scrolling through the Explore page and not really interacting with anything, but just being a fly on the wall, entirely disconnected with everything that I was seeing. So when I got onto Pixelfed and literally just saw 5 posts from the admin of the instance that I joined, I was very much underwhelmed. But I mean, that's the point. To take back control of what you see and who you follow. And that's a great idea. And I think ultimately it's better for everyone. But I just can't quite shake the feeling that most people, even if they do try it out, will probably bounce off fairly quickly because it is so entirely different than the experience that we've become accustomed to. Now, to be clear, I don't think these are problems that can't be overcome. I think having things like a nice Explore page would be great and do a lot for that. But the devs will have to actively fight against the way that most people have been conditioned to interact with social media and design their platforms around untraining us. it might even take slowly going in the opposite direction, giving us exactly what we have now, but cross-platform, and slowly taking away features that we've become accustomed to. Kind of a reverse frog boil, if you will. I don't have all the answers, and I don't have the answer to this issue, but I think as long as these apps, 1, only focus on one style of content, and B, essentially attempt to force people to go cold turkey to an entirely new mode of social media interaction, I think they'll remain in the more niche side of the internet for a lot of people. I love the pitch, and if it sounds cool to you, I think you should absolutely give it a try. And with the more mainstream apps slowly but surely federating, it might actually work out in the end, regardless of if the more normie crowd clues in. Ultimately, I'm optimistic about the goal, and I really love the idea of a more open and accessible and human internet. And I think this really has potential to get us there. We'll just have to wait and see, and for those of you like me, it's just a matter of giving it a try and being willing to look past some temporary shortcomings. But that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe you learned something. Thank you so much for watching to this point, and if you're still here, don't forget to do all the YouTube things before you leave. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a comment. I always love hearing from you guys, and I think this topic specifically would really benefit from your opinion on all of the things that I've been talking about. If I missed anything, please do feel free to leave that in the comments. That's always super helpful. Other than that, though, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Oh, it's so fruity, dude. It's so fruity.